Now, we have a question from Dr. Connie Remorosa. I'd like to invite the other panelists to try to answer the question too. The question from Connie is, why do you think other Asians, like Chinese and Asian Indians, performed well or better in SAT compared to Filipinos? It's not easy to answer this question because in the first place we don't have that much disaggregated data. We don't have that much research uh, to allow us to dive deeper, okay, into this particular relationships of ethnicity and performance in an SAT. We have like a universal research using data from general population that tells us that performance in these tests, for example, are related to socioeconomic status, to parental education. Although if you look at the status of Filipinos on these two areas, they're pretty well off economically, and there's a higher percentage of parents who have a bachelor degrees, at least a bachelor or bachelor degrees, and of course, uh, uh, we have seen earlier that actually, compared to other Asians, maybe we can find a clue from this data that there's a lower percentage of Filipino Americans who aspire for even higher, than bachelor degree. There may be clue in that. But yes, we really need to have more disaggregated data across the board, and more studies to be done in this particular area. Would any of our panelists try to proffer any response about the differences between Filipinos and other Asian groups? You see, it's really difficult. Yes, Xavier.
I agree. I agree with the the point that you made about how standardized testing is sort of more linked as a correlate to socioeconomic status, which is of course linked to being in a resource school and things of that nature, which is part of why the UC system has done away with them for now. Mm-hmm. I think that something else that could be noteworthy in this regard is the work of Robert Teranishi and Tracy Buenavista, who really illustrate that the racial ambiguity of Filipino Americans makes a difference in how they are treated by academic professionals in their lives. So there's work that's been done that shows that even though, as you said, Filipino Americans have relative some of the privileges of education in their families and in their schools themselves, they are treated subjectively differently by counselors and teachers because of their ethnic appearance. So if they are perceived to, look Latinx or to look, quite frankly, non-Asian, then they are not as actively encouraged to access particular resources that will facilitate academic success. So that's another perspective to consider in that topic.
Okay, thank you, Xavier. A question from Dr. Lea Tolosa. Are there differences in the experiences of Filipino Americans on the West and East Coasts? It seems to me that because there are more Philams on the West Coast, this kind of activism is more intense than on the East Coast. Any response to that? For those who have had experience on the Midwest, for example, maybe, right, Xavier? What do you think?
Well, I have a thought, but I was just, if any of my other panelists want to chime in.
Sure.
There are definitely, so I know for sure there's research on the differences between West Coast and East Coast Filipinos with respect to migration patterns and policies and when they arrived in the US and the types of experiences they have, in particular to college students. It's probably there, but I won't speak to it. But there definitely, for Asian Americans in general, there is a difference in how they experience the campus climate, how they make sense of their college experiences. And one of my colleagues has his dissertation work, Jason Chan, on East Coast versus Midwest and West Coast in terms of the Asian American college experience.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Crystal. Last two questions. Okay, I guess I have those last two questions from Dr. Rodel Barrientos. A question for Dr. Hernandez. It's a very enlightening talk. I wonder if the sense of belonging of Philam students have or could be related to the proportion of faculty or staff of Filipino American ethnicity, or maybe anyone can answer this question.
I always go back to this issue of it's complicated.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I guess full disclosure, right? I'm always invited to like these Filipino American staff and faculty potlucks that happen on campus at UCI, right? Because there is, quite frankly, a large Filipino American staff and faculty, population, and quite frankly, many of them are in student affairs, but there just seems to be a disconnect between where they actually connect with influential Filipino American students. And my insight into that, just based on working with students all across the country, is that Filipino American students are not used to representatives of their school, any school, K-12 higher ed, speaking their language, literally and figuratively, right? I think that that sense of belonging comes, that lack thereof. I mean, I think that Filipino American students come into these universities not expecting these universities to have people who can speak to their concerns as Filipino Americans. And I think also sort of related to our last question, but like, especially in California, these universities have such long storied Filipino American student communities, right? At LA, Berkeley, San Francisco State, all over, right? That the work that they do is very insular. The work that these Filipino American students do is so based on, let me uphold the traditions of kababayan at UCI or samahang at UCLA, right? That they don't, again, they're conditioned not to expect that from their university, despite the fact that it is, in many cases, abundantly there. So that's why I say that active outreach is important. You cannot just assume that because there's people there that connection will automatically be made.
Okay, two members of our audience have like a similar question. How do you make Filipino students visible, okay, at UCI or at any university for that matter? Dr. Asuncion Raimundo also was asking that question, how to increase the visibility, in this case, the STEM Philam students in the US. So any reply from other members of the panel?
I think there's we need to think about a little bit of what visibility means. Does it mean like a critical mass of students being admitted? Is it mean that what does visibility mean? Is it like we're talking about admissions, more Filipinos at UC Berkeley or at UCI? I think that there's definitely you need some sort of structural support, because just because they're admitted, as Xavier was pointing out, it doesn't mean that they would feel that they belong on campus. And at Berkeley, there's actually, I think, probably less Filipino staff than it is at UCI. In terms of student affairs, I think I might be the only one of that working with students directly. Two of us, there's CC Abrosio and Jenek. It's also very rare for Filipinos in student affair at Berkeley. So I think that we also need to change not only the outreach, but also the pipeline. A lot of outreach is being done ad hoc by students, right? You have PAASE, Filipino Academic Student Services, who are doing outreaches to even the Black Recruitment Center, right? So it's students themselves are actually trying to get URMs to get to campus because, because of Prop 209, it really limits admissions to do those kind of work. So it really falls on students themselves who are not paid to do this kind of outreach work. So I think aside from increasing visibility, it's really that you really need to build a pipeline that is intentional, that has, you have to need people in places that are really like, we really need to come together, work together to like advocate for Filipinos, for instance, in a UC campus, right? Or even across the UC. Like, how do we do that? Because I think it's really difficult, like seeing how different ethnic groups are kind of coming together and doing that. I don't think there is such a thing that's, you have HSI, right? In Berkeley, we have now the African American Initiative Scholarship to increase Black students on campus. We don't have anything like that fomenting that I see. I can speak for Berkeley itself. I don't see any kind of like organized way of advocating for Filipinos. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes sense. Now, I guess I'll read one more question, and possibly some of the other questions we have, we can actually answer after the second set of presentations. I have here a question from Dr. Vince Daria. As a group leader of a research group or laboratory, I received so many emails from potential students from India and China, indicating their interest to pursue graduate studies under me. Why do you think I received very less applications from Filipinos? Earlier, Vince, I actually talked about like in the US, only 9% of the population have degrees beyond bachelor. But 21% of other Asians, okay, have postgraduate degrees. And so I think this has also been my observation, even in my university. Like every the beginning of the semester, there are like big groups of students, who are non-Filipinos, who are from Asia, coming to the university. And so that has also been my question, and this is possibly because of the lack of motivation or aspiration or even role models among the Filipino students to aspire, okay, for advanced degrees. So it's really something, for me, it's alarming, because it means that we are not really getting to the point where we are producing or generating enough scientists, okay, and experts in several fields of science. So would any want to respond to that question?
So I just want to amplify the answer that was posted in the chat, and this is related to actually from the president of University of Maryland, Baltimore County, UMBC, Freeman Hrabowski. I remember him giving this talk many years ago at a conference, and he asked this question: why are there more Indians and Chinese interested in STEM? And then he answered it and said, because there are more of them, which is the answer in the chat. And so when we think about numbers, to be thoughtful about, well, what are the populations of students and even generation stat, like we have, who are the international students that we're getting. So it might be it's likely that it's just because of numbers, there's just more. In terms of the question of what is going on with the career aspirations of Filipinos and Filipino Americans, and also depending on their generational status, those are all things where there are many different influences, even just from my study on Filipino American women, but there are many, many different external factors that are applying pressures on their decisions. So they might have the aspirations to pursue science, but then they get they have all their other pressures that are telling them like, okay, you're not good at this math class, therefore you're not going to be able to persist, therefore you should just stop thinking about STEM. So they get these different messages that maybe say they're not good enough for STEM, that they come in excited, and then college kind of messes with their beliefs in being able to continue. For some of them, they did make it through college and got their STEM degree, but then they realize in their graduate studies that they are just tired of the sexism and the racism. For others, it's that it's just they can't afford it. There are two different tracks of who migrated here. There are those that came with advanced degrees, and so they're able to provide more for their children, and then there are those that came and they don't have it, and so those second generation Filipinos are not able to have the same resources and access in order to even consider a science degree. So it could be a bunch of other things too. I'd love to hear other thoughts, but it's many layers of systems operating.
Yeah, I want to share a personal lived experience of why is it that I think the having role models and representation of, seeing people who look like you succeed, become scientists, become doctorates is really key. So from my experience, so I was an undergrad at Berkeley, and I met a Filipino grad student who was studying a doctorate in the English department, and was like, oh my God, I didn't even know there was a doctorate program. I didn't know that. I didn't know that that was something possible that I could do. I didn't even know that there's something beyond a bachelor's degree, right? And the other thing is also funding. Part of the reason that I was able to go to graduate school, right? I come from a low-income family, is that I was offered a Cota Robles scholarship, fellowship, which basically funds 5 years of graduate school. And I don't have to worry so much about teaching. So there's many layers in which that I think having role models of seeing people, and this is really key also in undergraduates, when they see people like you exist as staff, as a lot of undergraduates think like, hey, you made it, I can make it too. So that was really key for me. And then the other thing is anecdotal, right? I remember telling people like, hey, I'm going to go to Berkeley. I want to major in, I'm a Berkeley student. I'm going to major in ethnic studies. I kid you not. I have a relative tells me, you should just become a nurse. Right. And I told them like, I got accepted to doctoral programs. Like, you should just become a nurse. Like, that really hurt me. Like, oh, not to say that there's something wrong with becoming a nurse, but I wasn't being pushed to inspire for what my passion is, what I'm really interested at. Right.
Thank you, Dr. Demara.